Are you ready? Drug-impaired students undermine our country's ability to compete on the world stage. Unfortunately, compared with many of our international competitors, we are very small. We only represent, or compared to our international competitors, the U.S. is operating at a handicap because to many of our youth, indeed our citizens, are abusing drugs. America represents 4% of the world's population, yet it consumes 2/3 of the world's illegal drugs. This is a quote from the Student Drug Testing Coalition. And drug use among teens, like in America and in our schools, has been at a rise. And I think it's because there's more drugs on the market than there ever has been. And they're easier to be accessed for most of us because of like medical marijuana laws and all the prescription pills that we like to take these days. And because of this, a lot of schools, about 16.5% of schools in America have implemented drug testing programs where we'll randomly drug test our students for drug use. And at first glance, this may seem like a really good way of deterring kids from doing drugs, but with further research, I've found out that there's actually more consequences to implementing these programs in our schools than there is like actual good parts. I mean, it does deter some students from using drugs, but not all of them. In an article by Ethan Nadelman and Jennifer Kern, who are the executive director and research associate for the Drug Policy Alliance, they state that these programs are costly, ineffective, counterproductive, and disrespectful of basic American principles. To start, I would like to point out the flaws in these programs, like inside of them, and how the programs or companies like the Student Drug Testing Coalition are justifying the implementation of these programs. In an argument by Bertha K. Madras, who is the Deputy Director of Demand Reduction in the Office of National Drug Control, she states that for years, schools have tested for communicable diseases such as hepatitis and tuberculosis, so this gives us good cause to test for the disease of drug use. And I would like to point out that drug use isn't a disease. It's not a disease like rehab shows like to show. It's a choice that people make. Like, you don't just like touch someone and all of a sudden I'm addicted to crack. Like, it doesn't work that way. And Student Drug Testing Coalition states that there's an obvious coalition or correlation between student drug use and the rise in like low test scores and, you know, drop in high school graduation rates all over the school. And this is probably true, but the argument that they're making seems to be more of like a justification of this program, and it doesn't show any real results. It's just an argument why we need this program. And now I'd like to point out like the issues involving this program, like when we implement these programs, the problems it brings to the schools. The first and biggest problem I would like to point out that oftentimes it doesn't work as a deterrent, and if it does, it's only for very specific drugs because the standard drug test only tests for marijuana or very few prescription drugs like Oxycontin or Vicodin, basically. And this is like a very small scope. This could make, you know, kids do a lot of other drugs, and this gives students like the incentive to do drugs that are more easily like tossed out of your system. You could just like binge drink overnight and drugs out of your system. And some kids actually resort to trying to like drink bleach or iodine to cheat the drug tests. And in small doses, it can work, but I mean, just like a little bit over that dose, and it could be fatal. So it kind of like gives kids the incentive to do some crazy things. These programs also like ban kids from extracurricular activities and like school functions that would normally keep them at school longer and like under the watchful eye of the school staff where they wouldn't be able to do these drugs. And like taking the kids away from these programs is like putting them back in the environment in which they started to do the drugs if they have already initiated the drug use. The problems don't only affect the students though, they also affect the teachers and the parents and anybody that pays taxes, because all this comes from our taxpayer money, and it's a lot of money. The average screening for a student is $42 for one student, and I have in the same argument by Ethan Nadelman and Jennifer Kern, they show statistics from a school in Dublin, Ohio that spent $35,000 on 500 students to only detect 11 students that were using drugs, which doesn't really seem like it's worth the cost at that point. After they had that one bad run, they hired 2 full-time drug counselors for the students that were at the school who had already initiated drug use, and have been working with that since. For many schools that haven't had the same experience, it provides like a false sense of assurance. Like if not a lot of kids are failing these drug tests, then I guess we don't have a lot of drug use, right? But they could just be as easy as they're like doing other drugs that get out of your system quicker, or binge drinking, which only takes 8 hours. So they took a study in an article by Peter Cattell entitled War on Drugs. They show statistics from a study conducted over 94,000 students, which is a lot of students where these schools didn't have random drug testing programs. And they found no difference between the schools that did have random drug testing programs and the schools that didn't have random drug testing programs. So once again, it's like, where's the change? So for the cost of the programs, this really isn't worth it. These programs also seem to undermine the formation of a trusting relationship in a school. We need to have a trust between the staff and the students and the staff and the parents. Otherwise, it's going to be like a rough place for a kid to learn in. You need to be able to express yourself to be able to learn properly, and all the problems that you have in the school. In an article called Making Sense of Student Drug Testing, Why Educators Should Say No, they show how the implementation of these drug programs creates tension between students and the teachers by creating an environment where the students often feel policed by the faculty. The programs also target students who have already initiated drug use, those on probation or obvious signs, come to class high. And it creates like a negative connotation towards these kids where it may not want them, they may not want to come to school because everybody's like, oh, that's the druggie, they might not want to come to school, and they'll be put in that environment where they're going to just further their drug use. It also creates tension between the parents and the staff, because a lot of the times the schools don't really give any warning to the parents or students. It's just kind of like, here's a drug test, and that's oftentimes breaking your medical privacy laws between the parents and the students. And so now I'd like to discuss a solution, a better solution. In my opinion, I think we should continue school, but year-round school, and lighten the time that we keep kids at school, and also introduce programs where a student would have to be, it's mandated that you're part of an extracurricular program in school, so that you have to be more involved in the school. And if you're more involved in your school, you're less likely to be in the situation where you'll be actively using drugs. Other ways, some schools implement drug counselors, where the kids who really want the help, because you can't help a drug user who doesn't want the help, the kids who really want the help could go and get it and feel comfortable and safe about the help that they're getting. And there's very little money to do all these drug tests, so it's better that we save the money for extracurricular programs and teacher benefits, so that we could still have money for these things in our economy. And I mean, with so many problems involving drugs in our society today, it's hard to ignore it. And we know that we need to do something to combat drugs in our schools, because I mean, all these kids in these high schools are our future police